Well, this election started off with, famously, Brenda from Bristol declaring, not another one. There is too much politics going on at the moment. Well, I'd like to agree and disagree. I disagree. I think there's not enough politics. I think the main parties in this election are dodging the main issue. The main question of our age is whether we leave the European Union, and our democratic process is failing us by effectively not giving us this choice in this election. On this very specific issue, we have only a general election. And due to the party system, the party structures, the parties effectively are not presenting us with that choice. So it's a very odd process whereby the accidental divorce, if Czechoslovakia had its velvet revolution and its velvet divorce, then we have an accidental divorce, one caused by Cameron not expecting to win the last election, not expecting to lose the referendum, and yet it seems to be institutionalized by the narrow victory, but also by the way in which the candidates and the parties have proceeded accordingly. For the Conservatives, Brexit offers an opportunity to heal their divisions on Europe, to play the unionist card, to play the patriotic card, and to get a majority and a mandate for their wider agenda. For Labour, torn between the working class Brexiteers and the metropolitan elites, it wants to try and ignore the election being focused on Brexit and instead pretend that the election is about domestic issues. In that sense, that's where I agree with Brenda, that actually there is too much politics going on in the sense that Labour is trying to shift the agenda to a change election on domestic issues, but in doing so, ignoring the fact that most votes cast will be about the Brexit in one form or other. So we have this odd election, the oddest election in our lifetimes. The importance of it is huge, and yet, bizarrely, the most important issue is not on the cards.
So I was thinking about some of the issues that are going to impact the vote at the election. I've just come up with about 7 points that I just wanted to put out there. Working in Department of Local Government Studies, I think it's incumbent upon me to mention the local elections, which we kind of all know, but it's worth remembering that, of course, the Conservatives did very well and Labour did quite badly and lost a number of significant councils, which kind of led commentators to think or to argue that a kind of natural constituencies are voting in ways that might not have been expected. The Lib Dems didn't make the comeback that was expected. The UKIP vote seems to have decimated, which has benefited the Conservatives quite significantly. And while the Greens made some progression in Scotland and Wales, they didn't make the progression that perhaps they would have hoped. The Conservatives also managed to secure 4 out of the 6 mayors, which I think is a higher number than a lot of people would have expected. The turnout was particularly low. That hasn't given those mayors perhaps the mandate that they would have liked, but at the end of the day, it's given the Conservatives a very nice story to campaign on, particularly in the sense that they secured the West Midlands. Second issue worth bringing up is what David mentioned as well, is that what we have here is the single issue versus the policy agenda election, with the Conservatives doing quite a good job revolving a lot of debate around Brexit, and with Labour trying very hard to push the national agenda and national policies. We also in Scotland see that the Labour vote is very much squeezed between a nationalist and a unionist debate, and these are, I suppose, policy discussions that have come very much from the public in the sense to which the policies have resonated with them, and this isn't necessarily a policy agenda that could have been imposed by the parties. It had to be taken up by the public. We also see unexpected voting behaviour in the sense that we see the apparent implosion of UKIP and the UKIP vote moving towards the Conservatives, and because of the suggested inelectability of Corbyn, we see the Labour vote going to the Conservatives. And the fourth point I'd like to make is the fragmentation of the Remain vote. And while we see the politicians in favour of Brexit or who are behind Brexit cohesive, there's a lack of cohesion behind the Remainers. particularly in terms of the electorate, and we're not too sure about how that vote is going to be distributed. In this sense, we also see discussion about progressive alliances between parties at an earlier point in the election than we might expect. And also we see perhaps some surprises in the sense that a number of Labour MPs are coming out against Corbyn and the Labour Party in a very explicit way and campaigning in a manner that is very constituency related and not party related. And I may be wrong, but I can't think of many politicians that have actually campaigned in a manner that has openly suggested that they don't think their party is going to win. And while in terms of activists, they're very much against this, in some respects, listening to the radio last night, a number of constituency members are actually find that openness quite refreshing. So I suppose the final point I'd like to make is I think this is going to be quite a disruptive election because of the unusual alliances that we might see and the counterintuitive voting behaviour that we might see. I've got a feeling in some respects that one of the most important stories from the election is actually going to be the distribution of the vote and the unexpected voting patterns. And while we might be expecting the unavoidable outcome of a Conservative majority, it might not be as high as many people think, and the actual way in which the vote is going to be distributed might be unexpected.
So I'm going to talk about where I think what is happening at the moment, basically based on all the data available. From my point of view, as a person who studies elections and voting, this is a very boring election because the result is guaranteed. It's not whether Theresa May will win the election, but it's about how much. But actually, it's actually possibly a very important election in terms of historically. Number one, what we're seeing is a return back to the 60s and 70s where the two main parties concentrate the vote. Now, for a long time, we were talking about the fragmentation of the political system, vote share around 60% for 65% for Conservative Labour. It won't happen this time, and this is a trend that seems to be developing. Number two, I guess, is the long-term future of the Labour Party, because this could, and this is one of the reasons I believe that Theresa May actually took on and went for the election, is because she sees the Labour Party as in complete turmoil and the possibility of its future being in doubt. Lots of evidence to suggest this is the case. If we look at what's happening to the Labour vote is much more left-wing, the people that are supporting Labour at the moment, than in 2015. There's a lot of undecideds who are core Labour voters, even if we go back to 2005 to 2010, and they're only being amplified by supporters from Greens and some Liberals. But what's clear is there's major issues around Labour in terms of its division, and of course for the leader himself, who's widely believed to be pretty incompetent in terms of garnering vote, which is a very important thing for us voting people who test theories of voting, because it tells us that issue priorities, policies that we all like to talk about, not going to matter very much. What is going to matter is that people don't believe that, even if they believe that Labour Party is the best on the healthcare, that they won't be competent enough to actually implement it. And we can see that in the data. Basically, lots of people like the policies of healthcare that the Labour Party put forward. The policy, for example, the other day on charging in hospitals, but more people think that Theresa May would do a good job on the health service than Jeremy Corbyn. It's all about valence, not about issue priority. Okay, and this is another election which will prove that case. The third issue is, I guess, is what was going to happen to the Liberal Democrats, and it's not good news for the Liberal Democrats. Their vote, as we saw in the local elections, went up by about 3 or 4%, which is completely in line with polling and in line with all the data that we have. But their number of seats went down, and that is definitely on the cards at this election as well. In fact, I think they'll either stand still or probably lose seats under this scenario, simply because we've got the fourth element to this case, and that of course is the blue wall that is developing in the solidifying of Conservative support. All of the estimates show from local elections, from data, that about 85% of those people who are defecting from UKIP are going to the Conservatives. And we also know that this Conservative vote is extremely strong. We know it's made up of a Leave vote, which are supporting the Conservatives again, and this Remain vote. Now, roughly 35 to 38% of people who were voted Conservative last time voted Remain in the EU referendum. You would have expected them to, maybe the Liberals, to take some of that support. There's no evidence that is happening at all. It's a trickle, not a flood. And the reason that is because if you look at these people, generally speaking, they're more inclined to be and this is why Linton Crosby has got Theresa May to say all these things, they're interested in this idea of strong and stability and getting through. It's all about that valence leadership, and that's really important for that Remain vote, and that's why we're not seeing the shifting over of voting in that way. The fifth major element, of course, is the unionist nationalist split in Scotland. So this is potentially very interesting because we're likely to see the SNP lose seats, the Liberals pick up a couple, and the Conservatives do much better. We might even see Labour, funnily enough, do a little bit better. The local election results for Labour were fairly good and quite encouraging in certain areas. But it just shows how the way in which Scotland, damaging for Liberals on the long term in their Celtic fringe areas, but generally speaking, how that split is now taking hold there and will be positive for the Conservatives. So all in all, and I might chat about the Progressive Alliance as well. Okay, that would be my sixth point. Progressive Alliance, there's no evidence to show that this Progressive Alliance will work. In fact, there's a good case to say that it may work in a couple of places like Twickenham, Bath perhaps, but generally speaking, a lot of the Green support actually like Corbyn more than they like Farron. They like the Labour policies more than they like the Liberal policies. They remember the electoral credibility problems, the Liberals going into government with the Conservatives. Whether that's going to translate in them back in the Liberals in those seats which matter, I'm very sceptical of, and we don't see any of that coming through at the moment.